Have you ever looked directly into someone's eyes, listened to every single word coming out of their mouth that sounded entirely logical, yet deep inside your chest, an overwhelming sense of unease started creeping in? A quiet, subtle intuition whispering that the person standing right in front of you is actively hiding something massive. But then you immediately brushed that instinct aside. You blamed yourself for being paranoid, overthinking, or overly sensitive, only to find out months down the road that you were being systematically deceived and manipulated the entire time. The harsh scientific reality is that more than 80% of human beings are completely powerless when it comes to detecting deception as it happens right before their eyes. Most of us rely on outdated cultural myths, assuming that a liar will always look away, stammer awkwardly, or nervously scratch their nose. But if you consult seasoned criminal behavior analysts and high-stakes interrogators, they will reveal a chilling reality to you. The most dangerous and cunning liars are often the exact individuals who hold direct, unblinking eye contact for an unnerving amount of time while offering an effortlessly calm smile. They know precisely what obvious signs you are searching for, and they deliberately engineer their physical performance to disarm your skepticism and turn your own trust against you. However, the human brain possesses an absolute biological bottleneck that no conscious effort can fully bypass. When someone chooses to fabricate a lie, their nervous system enters an acute state known as cognitive overload. The brain is forced to run at maximum capacity. It must simultaneously invent a fictional narrative from scratch, memorize every invented detail to maintain consistency, actively scan your micro-reactions for any sign of doubt, and manually suppress every natural reflex across 43 distinct facial muscles. Think of it as a high-performance mechanical engine running far beyond its thermal limit. That immense internal pressure can't remain trapped forever. It is biologically forced to escape through subtle psychological release valves, tiny micro-expressions, and involuntary physical twitches that flash across the body in less than 1/25th of a second. Right now, you're about to step directly into the analytical perspective of an elite behavioral profiler. You're about to master the 7 psychological tricks used in high-pressure interrogation rooms to accurately read anyone within the first few seconds of interaction. You will discover how to identify subtle spikes in blinking frequency, decode the subconscious directional shifts of the eyes, interpret invisible hand-pacifying gestures around the neck, and spot the microfractures in vocal pacing that betray even the most polished sociopath. Once you internalize these neurological principles, you will possess an invisible psychological radar and a lifelong shield, ensuring you will never be manipulated, misled, or left in the dark ever again. Let us begin. To truly understand how a criminal profiler deconstructs human behavior, you must first abandon everything television dramas and internet pop psychology have taught you. Most people approach deception detection with a fundamentally flawed mindset. They search for a universal smoking gun, believing that if someone scratches their ear or stutters on a specific word, they are instantly guilty. When I first began studying behavioral science, I made that exact same rookie mistake. I treated every subtle twitch as an undeniable confession of guilt, and all it accomplished was making me hyper-paranoid and completely blind to the actual psychological reality unfolding right in front of me. Professional behavioral analysts do not look for isolated signs. They search for deviations from an established behavioral baseline. This brings us directly to the foundational rule of high-stakes profiling, which is trick number 1, the calibration of the baseline. Before a seasoned investigator asks a suspect a single question about a crime, they spend the first 10 to 15 minutes engaging in seemingly trivial, harmless small talk. They ask about the traffic on the way over, the weather outside, or where the person bought their morning coffee. The interrogator is not being polite. They are actively calibrating the subject's normal physiological state. They are recording how rapidly the person blinks when they are completely relaxed, what their natural vocal pitch sounds like, how much physical space their body naturally occupies, and how often their hands move when there is zero psychological pressure. Every individual has a unique baseline. Some naturally nervous people might fidget constantly and avoid direct eye contact even when telling absolute truth, while a sociopathic liar might maintain unblinking eye contact with complete physiological stillness. If you do not establish the baseline first, any analysis you attempt later is nothing more than pure guesswork. You cannot detect an abnormal deviation until you fully understand what normal looks like for that specific individual. Once the baseline is firmly locked in your mind, you suddenly gain the ability to spot the exact millisecond their nervous system undergoes a stress spike. Now, once that baseline is established, what is the very first biological tell that begins to unravel when a person pivots into a lie? This leads us to trick number 2, the blink rate spike and the cognitive deluge. The average human being naturally blinks between 15 to 20 times per minute under standard conditions. However, the neurobiology of the eye is directly tethered to cognitive processing power within the prefrontal cortex. When a person actively fabricates a story, the mental effort required to construct false details pulls immense processing resources away from involuntary autonomic functions. During the actual moment of fabrication, something fascinating happens. The subject's blink rate suddenly plummets. They might stare at you with an unnerving, hyper-focused intensity, blinking only 2 or 3 times over an entire 30-second span, as their brain works overtime to assemble a logically sound fiction. But the real giveaway happens the precise second the lie leaves their mouth. The moment they finish delivering the fabricated statement, the brain experiences a sudden drop in cognitive load, accompanied by a subtle wave of adrenaline. Instantly, the suppressed autonomic system overcompensates. Their eyelids will suddenly begin fluttering rapidly, spiking to 40, 50, or even 60 blinks per minute. In behavioral science, this is known as the post-deception flutter. If someone maintains an unnatural, unblinking gaze while describing an alibi, and then immediately transitions into a rapid-fire fluttering of the eyelids the second they finish speaking, you are witnessing an unmistakable biological reset following heavy cognitive strain. Yet, as telling as the eyes may be, there is a much darker and more fleeting signal that even the most calculated individuals cannot consciously control. This brings us to trick number 3, the asymmetric microexpression and duping delight. In the late 20th century, legendary psychologist Dr. Paul Ekman proved that human facial expressions are governed by 2 distinct neurological motor systems. The pyramidal tract controls voluntary, conscious facial movements, which allows you to put on a polite smile for a photograph, but the extrapyramidal motor system controls involuntary, deep-seated emotional impulses that originate deep within the limbic system. When a person feels a raw emotion such as fear, guilt, or contempt, the extrapyramidal system fires instantly, sending microcontractions across 43 facial muscles. If they are actively trying to hide that emotion, the conscious brain quickly overrides it, but not before a microexpression leaks onto the face for 1/25th of a second. The most critical marker to watch for here is facial asymmetry. Genuine emotional expressions are almost perfectly symmetrical because they are driven by natural, balanced neurological firing across both hemispheres of the brain. When someone experiences genuine happiness, the zygomatic major muscles pull both corners of the mouth upward equally, and the orbicularis oculi muscles contract around both eyes, creating authentic crow's feet. A fabricated expression, however, is manufactured purely by the conscious motor cortex, which struggles to coordinate muscular symmetry. If you ask someone a direct question and one single corner of their mouth curls upward for a fraction of a second, while the rest of their face remains flat, you have just spotted the classic microexpression of contempt or duping delight. Duping delight is the subconscious thrill that a deceptive person experiences when they believe they have successfully tricked you. It flashes across the face like lightning, and once you train your eyes to see that subtle, one-sided smirk, you will never be blind to it again. But what if the person you are observing has trained themselves to keep their facial muscles completely frozen? Where does that suppressed neurological pressure escape next? That brings us to trick number 4, the neurological eye accessing cues and cognitive retrieval vectors. Cognitive neuroscientists have long mapped the distinct ways our brains access different memory circuits. When a person is genuinely recalling an actual visual memory from their past, their eyes will naturally dart upward and to their left, which connects directly to the visual memory bank stored within the non-dominant hemisphere. They are literally looking back in time to retrieve a stored mental photograph of what genuinely occurred. Conversely, when an individual is constructing a brand new visual scenario that never existed, their eyes will very frequently shift upward and to their right. In this quadrant of the brain, the prefrontal cortex is actively generating, assembling, and coloring an imagined scene. To turn this into an undeniable detection tool, professional interrogators use a technique called the reverse chronological probe. Liars always practice their cover stories in a strict forward chronological timeline, from point A to point B to point C. If you suspect someone is lying about their whereabouts last night, never ask them to repeat the story forward. Instead, ask them to describe the events completely backward, starting from the moment they walked through their front door at midnight and working their way back to 7 in the evening. A truthful person who is accessing genuine visual memories can easily navigate backward because the real memory exists as a complete three-dimensional emotional tapestry. But a deceptive person whose brain has only constructed a linear script will instantly experience catastrophic cognitive failure. Their eye movement will violently oscillate, their speech cadence will grind to a dead halt, and you will see their mental engine stall in real time as the fabricated construct collapses under its own weight. Now, as this cognitive strain intensifies, the subject's autonomic nervous system inevitably triggers an ancient physiological survival response. This leads us directly to trick number 5, pacifying gestures and the vagus nerve reset. The moment the human brain recognizes that it is in danger of being exposed, the amygdala fires a shot of adrenaline and cortisol through the bloodstream, instantly elevating the heart rate and constricting peripheral blood vessels. Because civilized adults cannot physically run out of the room or punch their conversational partner, the body must find an immediate, covert way to calm itself down. This is where pacifying behaviors occur. Pay extraordinarily close attention to where a person's hands move the moment a difficult or probing question is asked. The most profound pacifier in human physiology is the touching or covering of the suprasternal notch, which is the soft, hollow dimple located at the base of the neck, right between the collarbones. When a person feels deeply threatened, insecure, or deceitful, their hand will subconsciously rise to cover or touch this specific area. Biologically, this is an ancient protective reflex designed to shield the vulnerable carotid artery from physical predators. Furthermore, massaging the side of the neck or gently touching the throat stimulates the vagus nerve, which releases acetylcholine to artificially slow down a racing heart. In men, this often manifests as constantly adjusting a necktie, pulling at a shirt collar to introduce air, or rubbing the back of the neck. In women, it frequently manifests as playing with a necklace, wrapping their fingers around the throat, or crossing their arms high against the chest to create a physical buffer. If a person was sitting with their hands resting calmly on the table, and the exact second you ask about a missing document or an unexplained text message, their hand snaps directly to their throat, their autonomic nervous system has just sounded a high-level emergency alarm. This brings us to trick number 6, linguistic latency and the verbal stall protocol. The voice is an extraordinary diagnostic instrument because human speech requires precise millisecond coordination between breath control, vocal cord tension, and mental sequencing. When a truthful person is asked a simple, direct question to which they know the factual answer, the neurological latency between the end of the question and the beginning of the answer is virtually non-existent, typically taking less than half a second. A deceptive individual, however, requires a critical buffer window to evaluate whether their prepared lie fits the specific angle of the question you just asked. To buy this vital processing time without allowing an obvious silence to occur, they rely on unconscious verbal stall tactics. The most classic linguistic stall is the verbatim question echo. If you ask, "Did you take the money out of the corporate account yesterday afternoon?" a truthful person will usually respond immediately with an emphatic, "No, absolutely not." A deceptive person will often echo the entire premise back to you. "Did I take the money out of the corporate account yesterday afternoon? Why would you even ask me that?" By repeating your exact words, their conscious mind steals an extra 2 to 3 seconds of mental computation time to craft their alibi and calibrate their emotional tone. Additionally, listen with extreme precision to their use of pronouns. When people tell the truth, they naturally and comfortably use first-person personal pronouns like I, me, and my, because they psychologically own the experience. When people lie, their subconscious mind experiences an intense internal conflict and attempts to linguistically distance themselves from the deception. They will suddenly drop first-person pronouns entirely, shifting to passive phrasing like, "the funds were transferred," or speaking in broad generalizations such as, "You know how things get mixed up at the office sometimes." That subtle linguistic detachment is the sound of an ego trying desperately to separate itself from its own manufactured falsehood. Finally, we arrive at trick number 7, the autonomic freeze response and isometric barrier architecture. Most people believe that the biological reaction to extreme psychological threat is simply fight or flight. But evolutionary biology proves that the very first, most primal response of any mammalian nervous system is actually the freeze response. When a predator approaches, movement attracts attention. Complete stillness ensures survival. Watch what happens to a person's overall physical posture during a critical conversation. When an individual is being transparent and relaxed, their body displays subtle, natural micro-movements. They shift their weight comfortably, their breathing causes their shoulders to rise and fall smoothly, and their limbs remain fluid. But the exact moment a deceptive person realizes they are on dangerous ground, their entire skeletal structure often locks down into isometric rigidity. Their shoulders will rise slightly toward their ears in a subconscious turtle posture, their feet will plant flat against the floor as their legs lock tightly together, and their hands will grip the edge of a table or their own thighs with intense, white-knuckled pressure. They are instinctively trying to make themselves as small, immovable, and unnoticeable as humanly possible to survive the perceived psychological attack. Simultaneously, observe the spatial relationship between their body and yours. A phenomenon behavioral profilers refer to as ventral denial. The human body naturally points its ventral front, meaning the chest, belly, and pelvis, directly toward people and concepts it likes, trusts, and feels safe around. When a person begins engaging in deception, their body will unconsciously orient itself away from the source of stress. Even if they keep their head turned directly toward you, their torso and their feet will subtly angle toward the nearest doorway or exit. Furthermore, they will begin casually placing physical objects between you and their chest. They will move a coffee mug, stack a pile of books, hold a pillow, or place a laptop squarely between you. These are not random movements. They are the subconscious mind's desperate attempt to erect physical barricades against the threat of exposure. When you fully master these 7 psychological mechanisms, a profound mental shift begins to occur in the way you perceive the human world around you. You no longer walk through life as the naive observer who constantly falls prey to charming manipulators, nor do you become the hyper-paranoid cynic who treats every single everyday conversation like a hostile interrogation. Instead, you step into the rare perspective of an empathetic profiler. You begin to understand that reading people is not about hunting for enemies or weaponizing suspicion. It is about understanding the raw, biological reality of human vulnerability. When a person chooses to deceive you, they are rarely operating as an untouchable mastermind. In truth, their brain is panicking, their autonomic nervous system is frantically firing distress signals, and their entire physical body is struggling to survive the unbearable weight of cognitive overload. Deception is fundamentally an emotional defense mechanism running on pure overdrive. When you know how to decode the subtle baseline deviations, the sudden blink rate spikes, the split-second asymmetric micro-smirks, and the desperate pacifying touches to the throat, you are no longer a passive victim in your personal or professional relationships. You possess an invisible psychological perimeter. You gain the power to see past the manufactured social masks that people wear every single day, allowing you to protect your energy, your mental peace, and your boundaries before irreversible damage is ever done. Take a moment right now and look back across the landscape of your own life. Think about the most painful betrayals and heartbreaks you have ever experienced. Think about the false friend who swore loyalty to your face while secretly working against you. Think about the romantic partner whose explanations never quite felt right, but you silenced your own intuition because you wanted so desperately to believe their words. Think about the business associate or colleague whose promises sounded absolutely flawless, right up until the moment everything collapsed into broken commitments and chaos. How much emotional anguish, wasted time, and agonizing self-doubt could you have spared yourself if you had possessed this behavioral radar 5 years ago? What would your life look like today if you had been able to spot that split-second micro-expression of contempt or that involuntary freeze response during that one pivotal conversation? You can never change the times you were misled in your past. You cannot rewrite history. But starting today, you possess the exact neurobiological framework to ensure you will never be left defenseless again. You now hold the lens that reveals what is genuinely happening behind the words. This psychological awareness is not a parlor trick. It is a foundational survival skill in an increasingly complex and unpredictable world. But knowing how to spot a lie is only the first foundational layer of human behavioral mastery. In our upcoming deep dive, I am going to deconstruct the single most dangerous form of covert manipulation used by dark triad personalities to silently rewrite your perception of reality without you ever realizing it. It is an invisible psychological trap that 99% of intelligent, high-achieving individuals fall into every single day. And once you are caught inside its web, escaping becomes nearly impossible. You cannot afford to remain blind to these hidden psychological games. Make sure you hit the subscribe button and turn on all notifications right now, because the next video contains behavioral keys that could legitimately protect you from the most destructive psychological trap of your life. You definitely don't want to miss what is coming next. Until next time, observe closely, trust the biological evidence, and master the mind behind the mask.